Hello everyone and welcome back to another lesson. And today we are going to be learning more about quadratic equations, and today we're going to learn about how to solve them by completing the square. So we've talked about factoring, we've talked about quadratic formula. Today we're going to talk about completing the square. So our instructions are solve each equation by completing the square. And this is our first example, x squared minus 2x minus 35 equals 0. So for the first problem, we're going to go through all the steps, which is 7 steps, which just like anything else we've done, like synthetic division, there's lots of steps, but it goes pretty quickly once you get the hang of it. So this first one will seem very long, and then the rest will go pretty quickly. So step 1, let's be more specific. Step 1, you're going to divide all terms by a. So remember that when you're thinking about a quadratic formula, you have ax squared bx c. And so our a term is our leading coefficient with the x squared term, which in this case is 1. And so therefore we're good to go on this one because a is just 1. There's nothing I can really divide by to change it. This rule really only applies if you have a 2x squared, a 5x squared, anything other than 1. So we're good on step 1. Step 2, all terms should be on the left side of the equal sign, and your constant is moved to the right side and insert blanks. Okay, so it's kind of a long step, but it's a quick step once you actually do it. So long step written. All terms should be on the left side. I guess not really all terms. All variable terms should be on the left side of the equal sign, and then your constant is on the right side, and you will have blanks. So how does that look? So that looks like x squared minus 2x plus blank equals, and we're going to move our constant on the other side now. That means obviously using the correct value to move it to the right side, which would be adding. So it'd be 35 plus blank. Okay, so it takes much longer to write it, write down verbally what you're doing versus actually doing it itself. Okay, step 3. You're going to find a value, and that value being b divided by 2 quantity squared, and you're going to add that value to both sides in the blanks. Oh, my bad. Find b divided by 2 quantity squared, and you're going to add that value to the sides in the blanks. Okay. Now, what does b refer to? Again, remember that our quadratic equations are ax squared minus bx plus c. So our b is the value that is with x. Right? So our b value is -2. So what is that going to look like? So I'm going to follow the steps like this, it's going to waste a lot of space on number 1, but I think it's easier to see visually what the step is. So step B is we're going to have negative 2 divided by 2 quantity squared. So my B was negative 2, so therefore that's how that got inserted in here. Let's write that a little bit differently. Looks like that B. So B equals negative 2, so that's how we got that. All right. So then we actually figure out what that is. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. Okay, so therefore I'm going to add this 1 value into my blanks. So step 3, we figure out what this value is, and then we add that to our blanks. Okay, and again, I'm drawing it out this way so you can really see where the steps are broken out. On number 2, we won't do this. Step 4, you're going to factor the trinomial and combine like terms. I just keep trying to write the next word. Combine like terms. So I'm going to rewrite this down here. Let's try this again. X squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 35 plus 1. So on the left side, we're going to factor. So we want to think, what are factors of 1 that add to negative 2? Well, the only factors of 1 are 1 themselves, and the only factor of x squared is x and x. Well, 1 times 1 is positive 1, but how would I get to a negative? Well, or sorry, negative 2 to be specific. Well, it would have to be x minus 1 and x minus 1. It actually ended up being the same thing. Over here, we're going to combine like terms, and we get 36. Now, to make this simpler on us, to go for the next step, because it's the same quantity, we're going to write it as a quantity squared, like such. Now we're ready for step 5. Step 5, we're going to square root, hence why we wrote it as a quantity squared. We're going to square root both sides. Okay. But it is important, don't forget the plus or minus aspect of this. Okay. So if I ever ask you what's the square root of 36, you're going to tell me 6. But when you're solving for a variable, you have to consider there's 2 options. Technically, it could be positive 6 or negative 6. So when you're solving, you have to consider the positive or negative option. So if we, and again, I'm going to write it step by step so you can really clearly see what we're doing. On number 2, this will be much more condensed. So we're going to take a square root of both sides. Okay, it has to be on both sides. You can't write a square root over the whole thing because it's not mathematically correct. So the square root of x minus 1 squared is just x minus 1. And the square root of 36 when solving is plus or minus 6. Okay, so very important. Don't forget. Okay, step 6. You're going to finish solving for x. Okay, well at this point, what do we have for step 6? We have x minus 1 equals plus or minus 6. Well, that wasn't a very good plus or minus. plus or minus, there we go, much better. At this point, to finish solving for x, I would need to add 1 to the other side. Now, how does that work when you have a plus or minus? Technically, that means I would get 1 plus or minus 6. So plus or minus means that I have 2 options. And so you just have to consider the 2 options. So we take it part by part. So 1 plus 6, well, that would be 7. 1 minus 6, that would be negative 5. I'm sorry. It's right there at the edge of the paper. Sorry, I have something, I have my lamp up there. I don't want it to knock off. Okay, knock over. Okay, so I finished solving. And step 7, which I kind of already skipped ahead, but step 7 is to state the final answer. The final exact answer, to be specific. And simplified answer. Oh, that wasn't supposed to be and. Oh, let's try that again. Lord, goodness gracious. Adding in things that don't need to be there. Let's try that again. Your exact answer. Oh, geez. Let's just try step 7 again. We're going to get there. Okay. State your final exact, comma, simplified answer. Whew. Exact and simplified did not make sense, but apparently in my brain it did. Okay, so step 7, state your final exact, comma, simplified answer. So therefore our answers would be 7 and negative 5. Okay, so let's review those 7 steps before we move on to question number 2. As always, this one always takes longer the first time around. We write it spread out. We really define each step so that it's clearly defined when you come back, if you need to come back to review the skill. So step 1, we divide all terms by a. This rule only really applies if you have anything other than 1x squared, 2x squared, 10x squared, 12x squared, whatever it may be. Then all terms should be, all variable terms, should be on the left side of your equal sign, and your constant should be moved to your right while inserting blanks. Step 3, you're going to find the value to put into your blanks by the formula b divided by 2, quantity squared, which we did here, and we added 1 to both sides. My bad. Step 4, you're going to factor the trinomial that you got from putting in the blanks, and you're going to combine like terms. Step 5, you're going to square root both sides, not forgetting the plus or minus aspect when solving. And then to finish solving for x, you add or subtract whatever with x. And then finally, simplify your answers. And in this case, we have 7 and negative 5 as our final answers. And that is completing the square. Okay, so let's try number 2. X squared plus 8x plus 15 equals 0. Okay, let's review those rules. So divide all terms by a. This already is 1x squared, so I don't really need to apply that rule. Step 2 is really just a formatting rule. So I'm going to rewrite this as x squared plus 8x plus blank equals, now this one's positive 15, so therefore I would subtract it to the other side, plus my blank. Step 3. Step 3 said we're going to take b divided by 2 and square it. So my b term is 8, and I typically do this over just in the margins. So 8 divided by 2, quantity squared. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. From here, we're going to factor and we're going to combine like terms according to step 4. Now, I need factors of 16 that add to 8. Well, that's going to be x plus 4, x plus 4, and that's going to be equal to positive 1. Now, in order for this method to work, we're going to have to write this quantity squared. Now, step 5 says we're going to take the square root of both sides, but we're not going to forget about our plus or minus. So square root. So I have x plus 4 equals plus or minus 1. Step 6 says to finish solving for x, which means adding or subtracting something from x. So therefore means subtracting, in this case, subtracting 4. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus 1. And then last but not least, step 7 is to have your exact simplified answer. So negative 4 plus 1 would be negative 3. And negative 4 minus 1 would be negative 5. So our answers are negative 3 and negative 5. Now, like I said, it's going to go much faster once you have those steps. You're not doing it all drawn out. It really only takes about a fourth of the page, whereas obviously our first example, we did the whole page. Well, I did. Okay, so let me go ahead and give you a number 3 to try on your own. And we'll come back together and see how you did. Okay, we're going to change the variable up, y squared, same concept, y squared plus 6y plus 8 equals 0. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here. Good luck. You're going to do great. Remember those steps. Let's see how you did. So first thing, we divide by a, but in this case, obviously that's not applicable because it's already 1y squared. Next thing is formatting. So y squared plus 6y plus blank equals, we'd subtract that 8 and add a blank. Then we're going to do our b divided by 2 squared. So we have 6 divided by 2, quantity squared, which would be 3 squared, which is 9. So we're going to add 9 to both sides. And then we're going to factor. Okay, now at this point, hopefully you're noticing a pattern that you have created when you're factoring. Now, if you notice, hopefully you notice, when you're factoring, what you have here is what we consider a perfect trinomial, in the sense that it very nicely has the same quantity twice. Therefore, you can write it squared. So it'd be x plus 3, or sorry, let's try it again, y plus 3, quantity squared, and it would equal 1. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I get y plus 3 equals plus or minus 1. Subtract that 3, so y equals negative 3 plus or minus 1. So therefore my final answer would be negative 2 and negative 4. Now obviously the instruction says finish solving for x. We can change that and just say finish solving for the variable, because sometimes it does change from x and y, but normally it is x. Okay, hopefully that one went well for you. Let's try the next one. skipped a whole line. Don't need to do that. Okay, x squared plus x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, now again, step 1 doesn't really apply to us in this scenario because it's still just 1. Second step is our formatting. Okay, step 3, we're finding what we're going to put in those values. Now, variable b is going to be 1 in this case. So 1 divided by 2 is a half. And a half squared is 1/4. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4. So we're going to be adding 1/4 to both sides. Now remember, you should be using vertical fractions, not slanted fractions. Okay, well, what does that mean for my factoring? Well, the same pattern is still going to hold true. It's still going to be a perfect trinomial that will create a nice factoring situation. Well, what is going to multiply by 1/4, or sorry, multiply to 1/4 and add to 1? Well, if you haven't noticed already, it's going to be the value that is b divided by 2. As you notice, b divided by 2 here is 4. We added 4. b divided by 2 is 3. We added 3. b divided by 2 is a half, so we're going to add a half. Now on this other side, we have 1 plus 1/4. Now we don't do mixed numbers, so therefore that would be an improper fraction. So 4/4 plus 1/4 would be 5/4. And I'm sure at this point you're going, whoa, fractions, we're not doing it. But it's okay, it doesn't get too complicated. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. So I get x plus 1 half equals plus or minus the square root. Now remember, we always want to simplify. We don't want to have a square root in the denominator, which is essentially what this is. So let's remind you how that looks. So you can take the square root of 5 divided by square root of 4. And in this case, square root of 4 simplifies nicely. And we get square root of 5 divided by 2, obviously plus or minus. Okay, remember you always need to simplify using all those skills that we've already learned. Then I'm going to subtract my half over, and I get negative 1/2 plus or minus square root of 5 divided by 2, which at this point you're thinking, hopefully thinking, well, it kind of looks similar to something we've done before, and it does. Notice they both have the same fraction of 2, or sorry, denominator of 2, so therefore we can add those fractions together. So we get negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 divided by 2. Hopefully you notice that answer now kind of looks like the quadratic formula. And that's right. I could have solved this question with a quadratic formula and I would end up with the same answer. That's what we're doing here. We're teaching different ways, essentially, to do the same skill, or sorry, to do the same end result. Okay, so we have by factoring, quadratic formula, and then completing the square. And it's your job to be able to show us that you can do each step. So make sure you are paying attention to instructions on a review or a test. Obviously, the assignment for this one is going to all be about completing the square. All right, let's try the next one. X squared plus 3x minus 2 equals 0. So go ahead and try this one out, and I'll pause and we'll see where you're at when I come back. How did that go? Hopefully went well. Let's see how it should have gone. Okay, step 1, divide by a. We don't really have to do that. So the second step is formatting. All line kind of got a little crazy. Okay. Then we have our b divided by 2 quantity squared. So that would be 3 divided by 2 quantity squared, which is 9/4. So I'm going to add 9/4 to both sides. Now, if you need to skip a line so you can write that vertically, go ahead and do that. I kind of squeeze it in there for that first one. Probably should just skip a line if I know it's going to be a fraction, which you should be able to notice it's going to be a fraction unless that middle number, b value, is even. So let's go ahead and factor that. So we get x plus 3/2 quantity squared equals, well, 2 plus 9/4. This is kind of like saying 8/4. So 8/4 plus 9/4 would be 17/4. Now we're going to take the square root of both sides. So I get x plus 3/2 equals plus or minus. Now remember, we got to simplify. Square root of 17 divided by 2. I'm going to subtract my 3/2 over. And then I'm going to combine like terms because they have the same denominator. So therefore, x equals -3 plus or minus square root of 17, all divided by 2. And that's how we solve number 5, and that should be your answer. Let's see about number 6. Okay, now we're going to get into rule number 1. 3x squared minus 4x equals 4. Okay, this one also has a formatting change. It isn't already equal to 0, which is fine because this is actually what I need it to be. I need the constant on the right and my variables on the left. But I don't have 1x squared, so I need to divide each term by a. That means I need to divide each term by 3. So I have x squared minus 4/3 x plus blank equals 4/3 plus blank. Okay, well, -4/3 divided by 2 quantity squared. Well, we shouldn't divide a fraction by something else. We don't do that. We don't divide fractions by another number. We multiply by the reciprocal. So really, I want to think what's -4/3 times the reciprocal of 2, which is 1/2. And then quantity squared. Well, this simplified 4/3 times 1/2 is going to be -2/3. -4 divided by 2 is 2. So multiplied by 1, you got -2/3. And then -2/3 squared is going to equal 4/9. Last time it was 9/4, now it's 4/9. And then we're going to factor, which again, this looks intimidating, but remember, it always factors down to x plus b divided by 2, and that was -2/3. So x minus 2/3 quantity squared equals, well, we got to combine like terms, so this needs to be 8/9. Sorry, not 8/9. Let's try that again. 12/9. I need to multiply that by 3, not 2. So therefore we have 16/9. Okay, Now we're going to take square root of both sides. So we get x minus 2/3 equals, well, this actually comes out nice because 16 and 9 are both perfect numbers, so plus or minus 4/3. Then I'm going to add my 2/3. All right, now because there's no square root, I am going to be combining like terms, but it's not going to end up looking like this. It's going to be more like the first answers. It's just going to have fractions in there, okay? Well, 2/3 plus 4/3. Remember, they already have the common denominator, so that'd be 6/3. And let's write this out just to make sure you can see what I'm talking about. 2/3 plus 4/3 versus 2/3 minus 4/3. Okay, two different answers. So this will give me 6/3, which is 2. And 2/3 minus 4/3 would give me negative 2/3. And that is our answer. So yes, number 6 does end up using a lot of different fractions, but it's okay. You guys can handle fractions. They are not the end of the world. I promise you that. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and pause. And I'm going to let you try. We're going to let you try number 7. We're going to do one more together. We're going to do one more, and then I'll let you try it on your own. Okay. 3p squared minus 12p plus 2 equals 0. So first thing we're going to do is divide everything by 3. So I get p squared minus 4p. And I'm going to add my blank while also moving over at the same time. Okay, then we're going to find our value. So negative 4 divided by 2 quantity squared, which would be negative 2 squared, which is 4. Okay, so good so far, not as many fractions already. Well, so this is going to factor to p minus 2 quantity squared equals, okay, well, we do need to combine like terms here. So 4 with the denominator of 3, the value would have to be 12/3, okay? Because 12/3 is 4. So 12/3 minus 2/3 is going to be 10/3. And now we're going to take the square root of both sides. Well, that's going to give me p minus 2 on the left side, but on the right side, I have to consider the fact that neither of these are going to simplify. So what am I going to have to do in order to make this proper? Well, that means we're going to have to rationalize. So I'm going to multiply by the square root of 3 on top and bottom. So I get square root of 30, and square root of 3 times square root of 3 is square root of 9. Square root of 9 is 3. Okay, so we did end up having to do a little bit extra work there. But again, it's all skills that you already have learned. You just have to apply for future content. Okay, now we're going to add 2. So p equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 30 divided by 3, which is correct. But is it simplified? Is it combined nicely? Not exactly. Okay. Well, how would I get 2 to add with this fraction? Well, it has to have a denominator of 1. Well, denominator of 1, or sorry, denominator of 3, and currently has a denominator of 1. So that means I need to multiply this whole thing by 3. Oh, and I've run out of room at the bottom, so we're going to go ahead and swerve over here. So that would be 6/3 plus or minus square root of 30 divided by 3. And now we'll go ahead and combine. So 6 plus or minus square root of 30 all divided by 3. So this one ended up not having as many fractions as number 6, but it did throw in a skill of having to rationalize, which is not the hardest thing in the world, but if you forget about it, it's going to make your answer not correct. So that is how you do number 7. And let's go ahead and write down what number 8 is for you to try. Okay, here's number 8. So it is definitely unique, but it is very similar in concepts to number 3, or sorry, number 6 and 7. So good luck on number 8, and I'll see you in just a second. Let's see how you did. So first thing I'm going to do is divide everything by a. So that's going to leave me with x squared minus 1/2 equals x. Now, clearly out of order, I'm going to put this in order for formatting for step 2 and insert my blanks. So that's going to leave me with, let's write this a little bit smaller. That's going to leave me with x squared minus x plus blank equals 1/2 plus blank. So I'm going to take b, which is -1 divided by 2, quantity squared, which is equal to positive 1/4. Looking good so far. Then I'm going to factor, which leaves me with x minus 1/2 quantity squared equal to, combine like terms, this is going to have to be 2/4, so therefore equal to 3/4. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. X minus 1/2 equals plus or minus. Square root of 4 is going to simplify nicely, so square root of 3 divided by 2. Add my 1/2 over. And combine to be 1 plus or minus the square root of 3 divided by 2. So hopefully that one went well for you. Okay, we're at it. The last problem. Number 9. Okay, number 9. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You heard me right. Yes, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. We are going to complete the square with all variables. It's going to be fun. It's going to be tricky, educational, and fun. And I know you'll enjoy the end once we get to the end. First thing we're going to do, divide by a. And I'm left with x squared plus b divided by a x plus blank equals negative c divided by a. Okay, now I write really big. I probably should have just skipped a line because we're going to have fractions up in here. So let's try that again. X squared plus b divided by a x plus blank equals negative c divided by a. Now, please make sure you keep the difference between b divided by a and x, okay? X is our variable in this scenario. B and A are variables, but they're in referencing the numbers. Okay, now we gotta find our step where we divide B by 2 and square it. Well, that's gonna be a little tricky with this, but we're gonna do it. So B divided by A divided by 2, quantity squared. Well, remember that when we have a fraction, in reality, we need to multiply by the reciprocal. So that would be B divided by A times 1/2, which would result in B divided by 2A quantity squared, because obviously we're just multiplying across, there's nothing going to simplify there. And squaring it would give me B squared, 2 squared, which is 4, and A squared. So B squared divided by 4A squared, which is a fraction. Yes, it's a little bit complicated, but that's okay. We're going to get there. Okay, are you intimidated yet? Don't be. We're going to get there. We're working it out together. Okay, now we're going to factor. This is the best part of when you have that pattern in mind. We already know it's going to be x plus b divided by 2a, quantity squared. Remember, it's always going to be what b divided by a is. Equals. Now on the right side, a little bit more complicated because I need to create common denominators. So that means I'm going to have to multiply this by 4a. So I get negative 4ac divided by 4a squared plus b squared divided by 4a squared. And I'm going to combine like terms before square rooting. So left side sits pretty. Right side, now we don't typically like negatives being in the first term, and b squared is a higher value anyway. So I'm going to rewrite this as b squared minus 4ac divided by 4a squared. Okay, hopefully you're still following along with me. Now we're going to take the square root of both sides. X plus b divided by 2a equals plus or minus. Now this top part, that's not going to simplify. So we get the square root of b squared minus 4ac, but if you notice that denominator is the same denominator from over here, and we squared to get that. So therefore the square root of 4a squared is simply 2a. I wonder if you see where this is going yet. Now we got to subtract b divided by 2a. So I get negative b divided by 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Well, they have the common denominator, so I might as well combine it. And I get, in completion, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And if you don't notice, that's our quadratic formula. So quadratic formula and completing the square are the same process. They do the same things. Okay, exactly what I said earlier. And I wonder how quickly it took you to realize that's where this is going. Normally students get it by the time they get to this step, but it's always a fun question to go through because it really connects the two concepts, completing the square and quadratic formula. So good luck with your assignment. That is the end of the notes, and I'll see you next time.